Marcus Thompson had always been a practical man. At 52, he owned 3 successful cattle ranches across Montana and had built his fortune through smart investments and hard work. His weathered hands told the story of decades spent working. The land and his sharp blue eyes missed nothing when it came to business deals. The auction house in Billings was packed that Tuesday morning. Marcus sat in the back row, his worn cowboy hat pulled low over his face. He wasn't there for cattle or equipment. Word had spread about a unique property going up for sale, a remote cabin and 50 acres of pristine wilderness in the Rocky Mountain foothills. The previous owner had died without heirs, leaving behind a property that hadn't been visited by outsiders in over 30 years. The auctioneer's voice boomed through the room as he described the property. No recent photographs existed. The last survey had been conducted in 1985. All they knew was that a cabin sat somewhere on the heavily forested land, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that wound through dense pine trees. The property taxes had been automatically paid through a trust fund, keeping it off the market for decades. Marcus felt something stir in his chest as he listened. This wasn't like his other investments. His ranches were all about productivity and profit. But this property called to something deeper in him. Maybe it was the mystery of it all, or perhaps the idea of owning a piece of untouched wilderness where he could escape the constant demands of running his business empire. When the bidding started, Marcus surprised himself by raising his paddle immediately. The opening bid was reasonable, but as other investors joined in, the price climbed steadily. Marcus found himself locked in a battle with a developer from California who clearly saw the land as a future resort site. Each time the developer bid, Marcus countered without hesitation. His ranch foreman, Jake, who had come along for the drive, leaned over and whispered, "Boss, you sure about this? We ain't even seen the place." Marcus nodded curtly, his jaw set with determination. Something about this property felt right, even if he couldn't explain why. The final bid came down to Marcus and the developer. When the Californian hesitated, at $95,000, Marcus raised his paddle one last time. $100,000, he called out clearly. The room fell silent. The developer shook his head and sat back in his chair. The auctioneer's gavel came down with a sharp crack. As Marcus signed the paperwork an hour later, the property clerk handed him a heavy brass key attached to a leather cord. "This was found in the previous owner's safe deposit box," she explained. "Appears to be the only key to the property. Good luck finding what it opens." She smiled knowingly, as if she understood something Marcus didn't yet. Driving back to his main ranch that afternoon, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made the most important purchase of his life. The key sat heavy in his shirt pocket, warming against his chest. Jake tried making conversation about feed prices and upcoming cattle auctions, but Marcus found his thoughts drifting to the mysterious cabin waiting somewhere in those 50 acres of wilderness. That evening, as he sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Marcus pulled out the brass key and studied it. The metal was old but well-maintained, with intricate engravings along the shaft. Whatever door this key opened had been important enough for someone to keep it safe in a bank vault for 30 years. His housekeeper, Elena, brought him his usual evening coffee and noticed him examining the key. "New adventure, Mr. Thompson?" she asked with a knowing smile. Elena had worked for Marcus for 15 years and had seen him through his divorce, the expansion of his ranching operation, and the lonely years that followed. "Maybe, Elena. Maybe it's time for something different." He tucked the key back into his pocket and took a sip of the strong black coffee. Tomorrow he would gather supplies and make the drive to his new property. The anticipation was unlike anything he had felt in years. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Marcus made mental notes of what he would need for his first visit to the property. Camping gear, basic tools, enough food for several days. The smart thing would be to hire a surveyor first, maybe bring along some of his ranch hands. But something told him this first visit needed to be made alone. The brass key seemed to pulse with warmth against his chest, as if it were alive with possibilities. Marcus Thompson had no idea that his life was about to change in ways he never could have imagined. Somewhere in those 50 acres of untouched wilderness, A mystery waited that would challenge everything he thought he knew about solitude, love, and what it meant to truly live. 3 days later, Marcus loaded his pickup truck with camping supplies and set out for his new property. The drive took him through winding mountain roads, past rushing streams, and towering pine forests. According to the survey map, he needed to find an unmarked dirt road about 40 miles north of the nearest town. The morning air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of evergreen and wildflowers. Marcus rolled down his windows and let the mountain breeze fill his truck. This was exactly the kind of peace he had been craving after years of dealing with cattle prices, drought conditions, and the endless paperwork that came with running multiple ranches. Finding the dirt road proved more challenging than expected. After driving past it twice, Marcus finally spotted a gap in the trees that barely looked wide enough for his truck. A faded wooden post marked private property was nearly hidden by overgrown bushes. This had to be it. The dirt road was rough and narrow, forcing Marcus to drive slowly as branches scraped against his truck. The path wound upward through dense forest, and several times he had to get out to move fallen logs that blocked the way. It was clear that no vehicles had used this road in years, maybe decades. After nearly an hour of careful driving, the forest began to thin, and Marcus emerged into a beautiful mountain meadow surrounded by towering peaks. In the center of the clearing sat a log cabin that took his breath away. It wasn't the rundown shack he had expected based on the auction description. Instead, he saw a well-built structure with a stone chimney, covered porch, and windows that gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. But what really caught his attention was the thin wisp of smoke rising from the chimney. Someone was inside. Marcus parked his truck at the edge of the meadow and sat for a moment, trying to process what he was seeing. The property records had been clear that no one lived here. The taxes had been paid by an automated trust for 30 years, and the previous owner had died without heirs. So who was maintaining this place? As he stepped out of his truck, the cabin door opened and a woman emerged onto the porch. Even from a distance, Marcus could see she was beautiful. She had long, dark hair that caught the sunlight and moved with a natural grace that spoke of someone comfortable in the wilderness. She wore simple clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt, but carried herself with quiet confidence. The woman didn't seem surprised to see him. Instead, she raised her hand in a gentle wave and called out, "You must be the new owner. I've been expecting you." Marcus walked slowly across the meadow, his mind racing with questions. As he got closer, he could see that the woman appeared to be in her 30s with striking green eyes and a warm smile that seemed to invite trust. She was even more beautiful up close, but there was something mysterious about her presence that Marcus couldn't quite place. "I'm Marcus Thompson," he said when he reached the porch steps. "I bought this property at auction 3 days ago. I hate to ask, but who are you and how did you know I was coming?" The woman's smile widened and she gestured for him to sit in one of the wooden chairs on the porch. "My name is Catherine Mills, and I've been living here for quite some time." She paused, studying his face with those remarkable green eyes. "As for knowing you were coming, well, let's just say I've been preparing for this day." Marcus settled into the chair, noting how comfortable and well-maintained the porch furniture was. Everything about this place suggested careful attention and love. "I don't understand," he said carefully. "The property records show no residents. How long have you been living here?" Catherine poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot she had brought outside and handed one to Marcus. The coffee was excellent, rich and strong, exactly how he liked it. "Time moves differently up here in the mountains," she said softly. "I came here many years ago when I needed to escape from the world. The previous owner, Harold Mills, was my grandfather. He left this place to me in his will, though the legal arrangements were complicated." Marcus sipped his coffee and tried to make sense of what she was telling him. "But the auction house said there were no heirs. That's why the property went to public sale." Catherine's expression grew thoughtful. "Grandfather was a very private man. He set up the trust to pay the taxes and maintain the property. But he also made sure that if someone with the right intentions ever came looking for this place, they would find what they needed here." She looked directly at Marcus. "You have the key, don't you?" Marcus felt his hand move instinctively to his shirt pocket where the brass key rested. How do you know about the key? Because that key unlocks more than just doors, Marcus Thompson. It unlocks possibilities. Catherine stood and moved to the cabin door. Would you like to see what your investment has brought you? As she spoke, Marcus noticed something extraordinary. The late afternoon sunlight seemed to gather around Catherine, making her hair shine like silk and her skin glow with an inner radiance. There was something almost magical about her presence, as if she belonged to this place in a way that went deeper than simple ownership. Marcus rose from his chair, feeling as though he was standing at the threshold of something far more significant than a real estate purchase. The brass key felt warm against his chest, and the mountain air seemed to hum with anticipation. Yes, he said quietly. I think I'd like that very much. Catherine led Marcus inside the cabin, and he was amazed by what he found. The interior was warm and inviting, with handcrafted furniture, colorful rugs, and shelves lined with books. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace, filling the room with dancing shadows and the scent of burning pine. Everything was immaculately clean and organized, as if Catherine had been preparing for his arrival. This is incredible, Marcus said, running his hand along the smooth surface of a hand-carved dining table. How have you maintained all this by yourself? Catherine moved to a cabinet in the corner and retrieved a leather-bound journal. Grandfather taught me to be self-sufficient. I grow my own food, preserve what I need for winter, and take care of the cabin maintenance myself. She opened the journal and showed Marcus pages filled with detailed notes about weather patterns, wildlife observations, and seasonal preparations. But how do you get supplies? That road is barely passable, and the nearest town is 40 miles away. I make trips when necessary, usually in the early morning when the roads are empty. I've become quite good at living simply. Catherine closed the journal and looked at Marcus with those penetrating green eyes. The real question is why you're here, Marcus. What made you buy this property without even seeing it first? Marcus found himself being completely honest in a way that surprised him. I don't know. Something about this place called to me during the auction. I've spent my whole life building ranches, making practical decisions, always focused on profit and productivity. But when I heard about this property, none of that mattered. I just knew I had to have it. Catherine smiled and walked to the window that looked out over the meadow. Grandfather always said this place chooses its people, not the other way around. He lived here for 40 years, and he told me that someday the right person would come along, someone who needed what this place could offer. And you think I'm that person? Marcus asked, joining her at the window. I think you're a man who has forgotten how to live for himself instead of for his business. When was the last time you did something just because it made you happy? The question hit Marcus harder than he expected. He thought about his daily routine, checking cattle, reviewing financial reports, making decisions that affected dozens of employees. Even his hobbies had become work-related. He couldn't remember the last time he had done something purely for joy. It's been a long time, he admitted. Catherine turned from the window and studied his face. There's something else, isn't there? Some reason you needed to escape to the mountains. Marcus found himself talking about things he had never shared with anyone. He told Catherine about his divorce 5 years earlier, how his wife had left him for a younger man, claiming that Marcus cared more about his cattle than he did about their marriage. He talked about the loneliness of success, how the more money he made, the more isolated he felt from other people. I wake up every morning in a big empty house, surrounded by everything I thought I wanted, and I feel completely hollow inside, Marcus said. I guess I was hoping this place might help me figure out what I'm missing. Catherine listened without judgment, occasionally nodding or asking gentle questions. When Marcus finished talking, she was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Grandfather used to say that some people spend their whole lives looking for home, never realizing they have to create it from the inside first. She looked at Marcus. Maybe that's why you're here. As evening fell, Catherine prepared a simple dinner of fresh vegetables from her garden, homemade bread and trout she had caught in a nearby stream. They ate by candlelight, talking about everything and nothing. Marcus found himself relaxing, in a way he hadn't experienced in years. Where do you sleep? Marcus asked. suddenly realizing the practical implications of the situation. I mean, I brought camping gear, but I don't want to intrude on your space. There's a guest room upstairs, Catherine said. Grandfather built this place to accommodate visitors, though you're the first one in many years. She paused. Unless you'd prefer to camp outside? The stars are particularly beautiful tonight. Marcus looked out the window and saw more stars than he had ever seen in his life. The mountain air was so clear that the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of diamonds. Maybe tomorrow night I'll try camping, Marcus said. Tonight, I'd appreciate the guest room if you're sure it's not an imposition. No imposition at all. In fact, I think it will be nice to have some company for a change. As Catherine showed him to the guest room upstairs, Marcus marveled at how comfortable he felt in her presence. There was something about Catherine that put him at ease, as if he had known her for years instead of hours. The guest room was simple but comfortable, with a handmade quilt on the bed and a window that looked out over the meadow. "Catherine," Marcus said as she was about to leave him for the night, "can I ask you something personal?" She turned back to him, her hand on the doorframe. "Of course. Aren't you lonely up here by yourself? Don't you miss being around other people?" Catherine was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I was lonely before I came here, even when I was surrounded by people in the city. True loneliness isn't about being alone, Marcus. It's about being disconnected from who you really are." She smiled softly. "Good night. Sleep well." As Marcus settled into the comfortable bed, he reflected on Catherine's words. Through the open window, he could hear the gentle sounds of the forest, wind in the trees, the distant call of an owl, the soft rustling of small animals in the underbrush. For the first time in years, his mind felt quiet and peaceful. The brass key rested on the nightstand beside the bed, catching the moonlight that streamed through the window. Marcus had the strange feeling that his real journey was just beginning. Marcus woke to the smell of fresh coffee and bacon cooking downstairs. Sunlight streamed through the guest room window, and he realized he had slept more deeply than he had in months. No worries about cattle prices or ranch operations had disturbed his rest. For the first time in years, he felt truly refreshed. When he came downstairs, Catherine was cooking breakfast on an old wood stove. She wore a simple white dress that made her look even more beautiful in the morning light. Her hair was braided down her back, and she moved around the kitchen with practiced efficiency. "Good morning," she said with a warm smile. "I hope you slept well. The mountains have a way of giving people exactly the kind of rest they need." "Better than I have in years," Marcus admitted, pouring himself coffee from the pot on the counter. "This coffee is incredible. Where do you get it?" "I have it special ordered from a roastery in Seattle, one of the few luxuries I allow myself." Catherine placed a plate of eggs, bacon, and fresh biscuits in front of him. "I thought today we could explore the property together. There are some places I'd like to show you." After breakfast, Catherine led Marcus on a walking tour of the 50 acres. She showed him hidden waterfalls, meadows filled with wildflowers, and ancient trees that had stood for hundreds of years. Her knowledge of the land was incredible. She knew where to find wild berries, which streams had the best fishing, and where deer came to drink at dawn. "How long did it take you to learn all this?" Marcus asked as they sat beside a crystal-clear mountain lake. "Grandfather taught me most of it, but some things you just absorb by paying attention. The land speaks, if you know how to listen." Catherine skipped a stone across the water's surface. "What about you? Do your ranches feel like home to you?" Marcus considered the question. "They feel like work. Good work. Profitable work. But still just work. I know every inch of my grazing land because I need to for business reasons, but I don't think I've ever just sat and enjoyed being there." "That's sad," Catherine said simply. "A man should love the land he owns, not just profit from it." As they walked back toward the cabin, Marcus found himself studying Catherine more closely. There was something almost timeless about her, as if she belonged to a different era when life moved more slowly and people had deeper connections to the natural world. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, as they paused to rest on a fallen log. "What did you do before you came here? What kind of life were you running from?" Catherine's expression grew serious. "I was a lawyer in Chicago. Corporate law, actually. Worked 80-hour weeks, lived in a high-rise apartment, and measured my success by how much money I made each year. She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Sound familiar? Marcus nodded. Very familiar. What made you leave? I had a breakdown. Not a dramatic one. Just a quiet realization one morning that I had become someone I didn't recognize. I was successful by every measure that mattered to the world, but I felt completely empty inside. So I quit my job, sold my apartment, and came here to figure out who I really was. And did you? Figure it out, I mean. Catherine stood and brushed dirt from her dress. I'm still working on it, but at least now I'm asking the right questions instead of just accepting the answers other people gave me. That afternoon, Catherine showed Marcus her garden, which was much larger and more sophisticated than he had first realized. She grew vegetables, herbs, and medicinal plants, all arranged in careful patterns that seemed to work with the natural landscape rather than against it. This is impressive, Marcus said, kneeling to examine her tomato plants. You could feed a family with what you're growing here. That's the idea, Catherine said quietly. Something in her tone made Marcus look up at her sharply. What do you mean? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, pulling weeds from around her bean plants. Grandfather always said this place was meant for more than one person. He lived here alone for 40 years, but he built it for a family. The cabin has 3 bedrooms. The garden is big enough to feed several people, and there's room in the meadow for children to play. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Catherine, are you saying? I'm not saying anything specific, she interrupted gently. I'm just telling you what Grandfather believed. He thought someday the right people would come here and create the kind of life this place was designed for. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the mountains, Marcus felt a peace he had never experienced before. The stress and anxiety that had been his constant companions for years seemed to have melted away in the mountain air. I should probably head back tomorrow, Marcus said reluctantly. I have ranches to run, business to take care of. Catherine nodded, but didn't say anything for a while. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. What if you didn't? Didn't what? Didn't go back. At least not right away. What if you stayed here for a week, or a month, or however long it takes to figure out what you really want your life to look like? Marcus stared at her, feeling a mixture of excitement and fear. I couldn't do that. I have responsibilities, employees who depend on me. Do you? Or do you have capable people working for you who could handle things for a while if you let them? Catherine turned to face him. When was the last time you took a real vacation, Marcus? Not a business trip or a working weekend, but actual time, away from your responsibilities? Marcus realized he couldn't remember. Every trip he had taken in the past decade had been related to buying cattle, checking on properties, or attending industry conferences. I don't know if I remember how to not work, Marcus admitted. Catherine smiled. Then maybe it's time to learn. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, Marcus felt the brass key warming against his chest. He was beginning to understand that purchasing this property hadn't been a real estate investment at all. It had been the first step in a journey toward discovering what his life could become if he had the courage to change everything. Marcus spent the next morning walking alone through the forest, thinking about Catherine's suggestion. The idea of staying at the cabin for an extended period both thrilled and terrified him. His entire identity was built around being a successful rancher, a man who controlled every aspect of his business empire. Who would he be if he stepped away from all that? When he returned to the cabin around noon, he found Catherine in the kitchen preparing lunch. She looked up as he entered, studying his face carefully. You've been thinking, she observed. Hard. Not to in a place like this, Marcus replied, pouring himself coffee. Catherine, can I ask you something that might sound strange? Go ahead. Do you believe in fate? In the idea that some things are meant to happen? Catherine set down the wooden spoon she had been using to stir soup. Why do you ask? Marcus pulled out the brass key and set it on the kitchen table. Because I've been carrying this key for days, and I still don't know what it opens. You seem to know more about it than I do. Catherine picked up the key and examined it closely. Grandfather told me this key would find its way to the right person when the time was right. He said it would unlock whatever that person needed most. That's not very specific. Grandfather was never very specific about anything. He believed some truths could only be discovered, not explained. Catherine handed the key back to Marcus. Have you tried using it? On what? I haven't seen any locked doors or boxes around here. Catherine smiled mysteriously. Maybe you haven't been looking in the right places. After lunch, Catherine led Marcus to a small shed behind the cabin that he hadn't noticed before. The building was partially hidden by overgrown bushes and seemed older than the main cabin. A heavy wooden door faced them, secured with an ornate brass lock that looked like it might be a perfect match for Marcus's key. This is what Grandfather called the memory house, Catherine said. He stored things here that were important to the family history. I've never been inside because I've never had the key. Marcus's heart pounded as he approached the door. The brass key slid into the lock perfectly, turning with a soft click that seemed to echo through the forest. The door swung open easily, revealing a small room filled with wooden trunks, old furniture, and shelves lined with journals and photograph albums. The first thing that caught Marcus's attention was a large framed photograph hanging on the wall. It showed a young couple standing in front of the cabin, the woman holding a baby. The man looked remarkably similar to Marcus, with the same build and facial features. The woman was beautiful, with dark hair and green eyes that looked exactly like Catherine's. That's Grandfather Harold and Grandmother Rose, Catherine said softly, and the baby is my father. Marcus stared at the photograph, feeling a strange sense of connection to these people he had never met. Your grandfather looks like he could be my relative. Grandfather always said this place called to people who belonged here. Maybe there are connections we don't understand. They spent the afternoon exploring the contents of the memory house. The trunks contained clothing, tools, and household items from previous generations. The journals told the story of the Mills family's life on the mountain, documenting seasons, celebrations, hardships, and joys spanning nearly a century. One journal entry, written by Harold Mills in 1965, particularly caught Marcus's attention. Rose, and I have decided this will be our last winter alone on the mountain. She's pregnant again, and we've realized that all the beauty and peace in the world means nothing if you don't have someone to share it with. We're moving to town so our children can have friends and go to school. But someday, when the time is right, someone will come back here and create the family life this place was meant for. Marcus looked up from the journal to find Catherine watching him intently. He wrote this 40 years before I bought the property. How could he have known? Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he just hoped. Catherine moved to stand beside Marcus, close enough that he could smell the lavender scent in her hair. Marcus, there's something I need to tell you about why I'm really here. Marcus set down the journal, sensing that whatever Catherine was about to say would change everything. I didn't just come here to escape my old life, Catherine continued. I came here because of dreams I started having 2 years ago. Dreams about this place, about a man who would come here looking for something he couldn't name. In the dreams, I was supposed to help him find whatever he was searching for. Marcus felt the brass key growing warm in his hand. Dreams about me? Dreams about a tall man with kind eyes and calloused hands, who had built a successful life but lost himself in the process. A man who would buy this property on instinct and find more than he bargained for. Marcus stared at Catherine, trying to process what she was telling him. The logical part of his mind wanted to dismiss her words as coincidence or wishful thinking, but standing in this room filled with family history, holding a key that had waited 30 years to find him, logic seemed less important than the truth his heart was telling him. What exactly were you supposed to help me find? Marcus asked quietly. Catherine stepped closer, her green eyes reflecting the afternoon sunlight streaming through the small window. Love, Marcus. The kind of love that makes a house into a home, and turns a piece of land into a place worth staying for. Before Marcus could respond, Catherine reached up and kissed him softly. The kiss was gentle, but filled with a certainty that took his breath away. When they separated, Marcus felt as if the world had shifted around him, rearranging itself into new possibilities. Catherine, Marcus whispered, still holding her close. I've known you for 2 days. This is crazy. Is it? Or is it just finally right? Catherine smiled up at him. Sometimes the most important decisions in life have nothing to do with logic, and everything to do with recognizing what you've been looking for all along. As the sun began to set behind the mountains, Marcus realized that the brass key had unlocked more than just a door to the past. It had opened his heart to a future he had never imagined possible. Marcus stayed at the cabin for 2 weeks, and each day felt like a revelation. He helped Catherine with her garden, learned to fish in the mountain streams, and discovered muscles he had forgotten he had as they worked together to repair the cabin's roof and update the plumbing. For the first time in decades, physical work felt like joy rather than obligation. During the evenings, they would sit by the fire and talk about everything: their dreams, their fears, their hopes for the future. Marcus told Catherine about his failed marriage and the loneliness that had driven him to work 18-hour days. Catherine shared stories about her grandfather and the wisdom he had passed down about living in harmony with the natural world. "I need to go back," Marcus said one morning as they sat on the porch drinking coffee. "Just for a few weeks to get my affairs in order. I want to promote Jake to ranch manager and set up systems so the businesses can run themselves." Catherine nodded, though Marcus could see the worry in her eyes. "You'll come back? Try and stop me." Marcus took her hand. "But I want you to think about something while I'm gone. I want you to think about whether you'd be willing to marry me." Catherine's eyes widened in surprise. "Marcus, we've known each other for 2 weeks. I know it sounds crazy, but I've learned more about myself in these 2 weeks than I did in the previous 20 years. You were right when you said this place chooses its people, and I think we were chosen for each other." Marcus returned to his main ranch and spent a month revolutionizing his business operations. He hired additional managers, implemented new computer systems, and restructured his company so they could function without his daily oversight. His employees were surprised by the changes, but pleased to see their boss looking happier and more relaxed than they had ever seen him. The hardest part was selling 2 of his 3 ranches. Marcus kept the original property where he had started his career, but he liquidated most of his holdings to create a financial cushion that would allow him to live simply in the mountains without worrying about income. When Marcus returned to the cabin on a crisp October morning, he found Catherine waiting for him on the porch as if she had never doubted he would come back. She ran to meet him as he got out of his truck, and when he swept her up in his arms and spun her around, Marcus felt complete for the first time in his life. "I have something for you," Marcus said, setting her down and reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "It belonged to my grandmother. She always said it should go to a woman who understood that the most valuable things in life can't be bought." Catherine's eyes filled with tears as Marcus dropped to one knee in the mountain meadow. "Catherine Mills, will you marry me and help me create the life this place was always meant to have?" "Yes," Catherine whispered, then louder. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married the following spring in the meadow behind the cabin, with wildflowers blooming all around them and snow-capped mountains as their backdrop. Jake served as Marcus's best man, and Elena, who had driven up from the ranch, stood as Catherine's maid of honor. The ceremony was simple but perfect, conducted by a minister from the nearest town who had never seen a more radiant bride or a happier groom. Marcus and Catherine spent their first year of marriage transforming the property into a true homestead. They expanded Catherine's garden, built a greenhouse for year-round growing, and added solar panels and a wind generator to make the cabin completely self-sufficient. Marcus used his business skills to create a small organic farming operation, selling vegetables and herbs to restaurants in nearby towns. By their second anniversary, Catherine was pregnant with their first child. As her belly grew round with new life, Marcus would often catch himself staring at her in wonder, amazed that the impulsive decision to buy an unknown property had led to such perfect happiness. Their daughter was born on a snowy December morning, with the mountain peaks glowing pink in the sunrise. They named her Rose after Catherine's grandmother, and from the moment she opened her green eyes and looked up at her parents, it was clear that she belonged to the mountains as completely as they did. 5 years after that first auction, Marcus stood on the cabin porch watching Catherine teach 3-year-old Rose how to plant seeds in the garden. A second child, a boy they had named Harold, slept peacefully in a basket nearby. The brass key that had started it all hung on a leather cord above their bedroom door, a reminder of the mystery that had brought them together. Marcus's original ranch was still profitable under Jake's management, providing them with enough income to live comfortably while maintaining their simple mountain lifestyle. They had built a small guest cabin for visitors, and Elena came to stay with them every summer, delighting in her role as honorary grandmother to the children. The memory house had become a repository for their own family history now. Marcus had added his own journals documenting their life together, and Catherine had started a collection of photographs showing the children's growth against the backdrop of the changing seasons. Sometimes, when Marcus was working in the garden, or splitting wood for the winter, he would pause and remember the man he had been 5 years earlier, that Marcus had been successful by conventional standards but had felt empty inside, driven by ambition that had no deeper purpose. This Marcus woke each morning grateful for the simple miracle of his life. The property that he had bought blindly at auction had given him everything he never knew he was looking for. The beautiful woman who lived inside the cabin had become his wife, his partner, and the mother of his children. But more than that, Catherine had taught him how to live with intention, how to find joy in simple pleasures, and how to build a life based on love rather than achievement. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and he and Catherine sat by the fire talking softly about their plans for the future, Marcus would sometimes pull out the brass key and turn it over in his hands. He still didn't fully understand the forces that had led him to this place, but he no longer questioned them. The mountains had called to him, and he had answered. A mysterious property had become his home. A beautiful stranger had become his everything. And a man who had thought his life was already complete had discovered that it was just beginning. As winter approached and the first snow began to dust the mountain peaks, Marcus stood in the doorway of the cabin watching his family. Catherine was reading a story to Rose while baby Harold dozed in her arms. The fire crackled warmly in the hearth, filling the room with golden light. This was what the brass key had unlocked, Marcus realized. Not just a door to the past, but a passage to the future he was meant to live. A future filled with love, purpose, and the kind of deep contentment that money could never buy. The cabin that had once housed a beautiful woman now sheltered a complete family. The 50 acres of wilderness had become a true home. And the rancher, who had invested blindly in an unknown property, had discovered that sometimes the best investments are the ones made with the heart rather than the head. Marcus Thompson had found his home at last, and it was everything he had never dared to dream it could be.